Hello, my name's Sherry Crabtree. I'm a horticulture research and extension associate here at Kentucky State University, and today we're going to be talking about fruit crops that you can grow in Kentucky. So fruit production in Kentucky, apple and peach are the most common tree fruits that are grown in Kentucky. Strawberries and blackberries are the most common small fruits that we grow in Kentucky. But there are some unique and different tree fruits and small fruits that we do research on here at KSU, such as pawpaw, persimmon, and other small fruits that are well adapted to the growing conditions in Kentucky and have fewer pest and disease issues than some of these other traditionally grown fruits. As you all know, here in Kentucky, we have a lot of hot, humid weather in the summer, some heavy clay soil that can lead to some challenging growing conditions in Kentucky, disease and insect pressure. Also, we often have late spring frosts and freezes that can damage early flowering fruit trees such as peach. But fruit crops can offer a high yield, high return per acre, and they're suitable for a variety of growing conditions, the rolling hills that we have in Kentucky. So we're going to start with blackberry. Blackberry is actually the state fruit of Kentucky. So there's two types of blackberries. There are summer fruiting blackberries that most people are more familiar with. They've been around for longer. And fall fruiting, or also called primocane fruiting blackberries, that produce fruit in the fall that are a newer type of blackberries. Blackberries are pretty easy to grow. They can be grown organically or low input. Unfortunately, the spotted winged Drosophila, which is a type of fruit fly, is now going to be a bigger problem in Kentucky, especially on the fall fruiting blackberries. That's when they're at their peak. The summer fruiting blackberries are usually getting ripe early enough that the spotted winged Drosophila is not a problem at that time. Blackberry fruit, you can sell them fresh at farmers markets, but there's also a market for value-added products like blackberry jam, blackberry wine. So if you would like to grow blackberries, remember there's the two types. There's the fall fruiting blackberries and the summer fruiting blackberries. The fall fruiting blackberries will fruit on the same season's canes, on one-year-old canes. So you can actually mow them down to the ground every winter. The floricane or summer fruiting blackberries, the canes have to be 2 years old before they will produce fruit. So you need to leave them for 2 years to produce, and at that point the old canes can be cut down and the new canes come up and start producing fruit. You also want to tip or pinch the canes in the spring, early summer. That helps them branch and helps increase fruit production. Blackberries do best in a deep, fertile, well-drained soil. And the most important things are irrigation and weed control in Kentucky. There's not a lot of diseases or insects besides the spotted winged Drosophila that are a big concern in blackberry plantings. So here are some recommended blackberry cultivars for Kentucky. The summer fruiting type ripen in July in Kentucky. So thornless varieties, Natchez, Osage, Ouachita, these are upright growing canes. They don't need a trellis. Triple Crown is also thornless, but it's a semi-upright or semi-trailing type, and it will need a trellis. A couple of thorny types that are recommended for Kentucky are Chickasaw and Kiowa. These are also upright growing and don't need a trellis. So for those fall or primocane fruiting blackberries, these ripen from August through October or whenever we have a frost or freeze, which is typically October in Kentucky, but we will have green berries and flowers even when frost occurs. So they'll keep fruiting for as long as the weather stays warm. The recommended cultivars for these for thornless varieties are Prime Arc Traveler and Black Gem, and thorny cultivars are Prime Arc 45 and Black Magic. And I should mention, of these, Triple Crown has a softer berry. Black Gem and Black Magic are also a little bit softer berries. So they're good quality, but they're more for home production or production where they don't need to be stored or shipped long distances because they are a little bit softer berry. The others listed are a firmer berry, good for commercial production and shipping and storing. So blackberry post-harvest value-added products. One of the most important things with blackberries and pretty much all the fruits that we're going to talk about, you want to get them cool right away after harvesting. You don't want to leave the baskets of the berries that you picked out in the sun to get hot during the day. That will shorten their shelf life. So get them into the refrigerator as quickly as possible after you harvest them. You can freeze the whole berries for longer term storage. And you want to pick them ripe when they're fully black, but not soft ripe to have the longest shelf life. So it's what they call a glossy black stage. The berry is still a glossy black color, like you see in the top photo, as opposed to the bottom photo is a little bit riper and kind of a matte black color. Those are going to be a little bit softer and not as long for a shelf life. Blackberry jam, jelly, baked goods. You also see blackberry wine, blackberry beers on the market in Kentucky for value-added products. They're very popular for fresh market sales, for farmers markets, on-farm or roadside stands, and you pick blackberries. So moving on to some other small fruits that are not quite as common in Kentucky, gooseberries and currants. These are the same genus. They're both ribes genus, and these are berry-producing shrubs also. There are red, white, pink, and black currants, and gooseberries, there are green, yellow, and red gooseberries. So some differences between them: gooseberry plants have thorns, currants do not have thorns. Also, gooseberries, as you see in this photo, are a single fruit, and currants are in clusters, kind of like small grapes. So if you're interested in growing gooseberries and currants, the number one thing you want to select disease-resistant cultivars, especially white pine blister rust. White pine blister rust is a disease that affects both white pines and black currants, but there are some really good resistant and immune black currant cultivars. Also powdery mildew resistant varieties, because we do have a lot of issues with powdery mildew, which is the fungal disease in Kentucky. Gooseberries and currants can be planted in fall or early spring. They're fairly long-lived plants, so about 8 to 15 years for currants, 15 to 20 years for a gooseberry planting. They are fairly small shrubs, so about 3 to 6 foot height and spread for the plants, and a 3 to 5 foot spacing between plants. These are pretty easy to propagate by cuttings or tip layering, and that's also the case for blackberries. You can propagate them by tip layering if they're not patented varieties, which basically means, as you see in this photo, you bend the cane or the stem down and cover it with soil and secure it in the soil so it stays buried in the soil. And that shoot will form roots where it is buried. And once it roots, you can remove that and transplant it, take it elsewhere, and you've propagated an additional plant. So growing gooseberries and currants, they are quite cold hardy. They're hardy to USDA growing zones 3 to 8. Here in Kentucky, we're in zone 6, but they do tend to bloom early in the year. They also do not really like the summer heat we get in Kentucky. So for that reason, north or northeast facing slopes are best because they're a little bit cooler. That will help them from flowering so early in the spring and also help them not get quite as hot in the summer. Also for that reason, part shade may be ideal for these, so morning sun, afternoon shade to help protect from the hottest days in the summer. And we're doing research on this right now, looking at gooseberries grown under shade cloth versus in the sun. You do want to choose a site that's got good airflow. That will reduce the chances of powdery mildew and anthracnose that are fungal diseases that need leaf wetness. And gooseberries and currants also like a cool, moist, well-drained soil with a lot of organic matter, pH slightly acid to neutral. Wood chip or some other type of mulch is good with gooseberries and currants. It helps keep the soil cool, helps conserve moisture, helps keep weeds down. We do need irrigation in summer in Kentucky. Of course, it can get pretty dry. Fertilization, really any type of balanced fertilizer is good, or even composted manure. You don't want to over-fertilize to get too much vegetative growth that can make powdery mildew worse. And you can prune these also in late winter to early spring. Just remove the oldest canes and any weak or spindly canes, any canes that are touching the ground or overcrowded. In spring, early spring is the best time to prune pretty much all of these plants that we're talking about. Currants, again, there are black, white, and red currants, and pink, which is kind of classified with the white currants. Currants are quite tart, so they're usually used in processing and things where they can be sweetened. They're a little bit too tart to just eat fresh. Black currants, some varieties that did well in our trial at KSU are Titania and Ben Sarek. Ben Lamond also did well, but it is not immune to white pine blister rust, so only grow Ben Lamond if you don't have white pines nearby. For white currants, Primus, Blanca, and pink champagne, that's that pink-colored currant, did well in our trials. Red currants, Yonkir Vantet, Red Start, and Ravada are recommended varieties. Gooseberries have a really nice tart raspberry flavor. They're generally red when they're ripe. Some of them are more yellowish. They have kind of a crunchy texture, almost a grape-like texture. These are a little bit more disease-resistant than the currants. They're low-growing. They can be grown on a trellis, but they don't require it. They're pretty upright growing. Some cultivars that did well in our trials at KSU were Hinnomaki Red, Amish Red, and Poor Man. And there are also Yastaberries, which are a gooseberry blackcurrant cross that did well in our trials. The fruit on those is more similar to a gooseberry. So with gooseberries and currants, it takes 2 to 3 years before they're old enough to be in full production. Each bush you usually get about 3 to 5 quarts of berries per bush, and these ripen in the summer. They ripen in June and July. Again, same with the blackberries. You want to refrigerate them immediately after you harvest them, or you can freeze them. Currants, like we mentioned, are more tart and astringent, so they're usually used in juices, jams, things that can be sweetened. Gooseberries, also used in jam, wine, baked goods, but they can also be eaten fresh because they're a little bit sweeter. And one thing that I think is interesting, currants are grown a lot more commonly in Europe than they are in the US, and Skittles in Europe are actually black currant flavored instead of grape like they are in the US. So moving on into tree fruits, Pawpaw is a tree fruit that is native to Kentucky. The scientific name is Asimina triloba. Pawpaw is in the custard apple family, and it's actually the only temperate member of that family. The rest of the family are all tropical and subtropical fruits. Pawpaw is a pretty slow-growing, small to medium-sized tree, about 20 to 25 feet tall maximum, but you can prune them to keep them a little bit smaller. The pawpaw has a tropical flavor and aroma. Kind of a blend of mango, banana, and pineapple is the best description of it. But different varieties have some different undertones. You'll taste pawpaws that have coconut or caramel or vanilla and melon flavors to them also. The texture is similar to a ripe avocado, or some of them are even softer, like a custard texture. You can just cut them open and eat them with a spoon. And you can see the interior of the fruit is kind of this smooth yellow-orange color. So here is the native range of pawpaw. The map on the left shows the native range of pawpaw. You see here in Kentucky, we're right in the middle of the native range. So it grows really well here. The map on the right shows where pawpaws can be grown. So basically all of the temperate regions of the U.S., growing zones 5 through 8. So the farthest, most southern regions of the U.S. don't get enough chill hours in the winter for pawpaw, and it's not quite cold hardy enough for the most northern regions like Minnesota, North Dakota, places like that. But pawpaw is hardy to about 25 below Fahrenheit. So pawpaws, being a native plant, we mentioned, you do find them in the wild. They're usually found in the understory of hardwood forests, and they form these large patches in the woods that are all from root suckers, often from the same tree. You've heard the song Way Down Yonder in the Pawpaw Patch. So it may look like hundreds of trees, but they're all from one root system in these patches. So often they don't produce a lot of fruit in these wild patches. And there's a few reasons for that. One, in the understory of the forest, they're shaded quite a bit. They just don't have enough energy to produce fruit. Also, pawpaws need to cross-pollinate to set fruit. And in these patches, remember, they're all from one root system, so it looks like a lot of different trees, but they're really all one genotype. They're all the same genetically, and so they can't cross-pollinate. Also, there may not be a lot of pollinators around. Pawpaws are pollinated by flies and beetles, and they're not quite as active flying as bees are. A lot of times the fruit in the wild patches can be poor quality also. So if you have wild trees and you would like to improve fruit production in your wild patch, there are some things you can do. You can thin out the pawpaw patch to the strongest trees, choose about 8 feet apart, the healthiest looking trees, and thin out the rest. You can also prune or clear out some of the surrounding trees that are shading the pawpaws in the patch to let more light in, and clear out any underbrush that's competing, especially things like bush honeysuckle that are invasive species, to give more resources, more water and nutrients for the pawpaws. You can also bring in seedlings or grafted trees from elsewhere to bring in some genetic diversity so there's other trees to cross-pollinate with. And if your wild trees have poor quality, you can also do what's top working, which is cutting down a tree and grafting a stick of an improved variety onto that tree to also increase diversity and improve quality. A lot of people ask about digging and transplanting these root suckers. That's hard to do. They don't have a lot of root system of their own. Mature pawpaw trees have a taproot that goes down really deep, but these root suckers are kind of attached by runner roots. So if you want to try to do that, the best way to do it is to cut around the root sucker with a shovel and leave it there for another year. And so it's kind of partially severed. It'll develop a little bit more of a root system of its own over that year. And then the following year, you can dig it and transplant it. So pawpaws, as we just mentioned, they need 2 genetically different trees for cross-pollination to get good fruit set. And we are finding that a single tree by itself will set some fruit, but they are not very self-fruitful. We won't say they're completely self-infertile, but they're not self-fruitful. You need 2 trees to get a full crop, to get good fruit set. They do need some shade. The first couple of years, really small pawpaw seedlings need shade. Once they're over about 1.5 feet tall, they can be in full sun, and they will produce more fruit in full sun than shade. Pawpaws like a soil that is slightly acid to neutral, moist but well drained, and lots of organic matter. You do need irrigation and weed control with pawpaws. Those are 2 of the most important things. There are not a lot of pest and disease issues with pawpaws, so they can be grown organically pretty easily. They're a fairly small tree, so 8 to 10 feet between trees is the recommended plant spacing, and planting them in the spring versus the fall is recommended. Some pawpaw cultivars that we recommend for Kentucky. Here at Kentucky State University, we have a pawpaw breeding program. So we have bred and released 3 pawpaw cultivars so far that have been tested right here in Kentucky and do really well. KSU Atwood, KSU Benson, and KSU Chappelle all have excellent quality fruits, high yields, do well in Kentucky. Some other varieties that are recommended are Susquehanna, Wabash, Potomac, Shenandoah, and Tallahatchie. Those are all from the Peterson Pawpaw Breeding Program from West Virginia. Some older cultivars that also do well in Kentucky are Sunflower, NC1, and Overlease. If you're looking for where to buy pawpaw trees, there are a few nurseries in Kentucky that sell pawpaw trees. England's Orchard Nursery, Peaceful Heritage, and Oakland Farm Trees. Also, the Kentucky State Division of Forestry has a state nursery program that sells pawpaw seedlings. So when you're ready to harvest your pawpaws, pawpaws get ripe late August through late September here in Kentucky. It's a little bit tricky to harvest them because the skin does not change color generally when they get ripe like most fruit. Some of them will turn a little bit yellow, but in general they're still green when they're ripe. But the fruit will drop off the tree when they're ripe. So that's the first thing you'll see. You'll see a few fruit underneath the tree. You'll know that that tree is starting to get ripe. You can hand harvest them. It's kind of by touch. Just feel the fruit when it's starting to get soft, kind of like a ripe peach. Then it's ready to pick, and the fruit will come off easily in your hand when it's ripe. If it's hard and you give it a little wiggle and it doesn't fall off in your hand, then the fruit is not ready to pick yet. So the fruit are soft when they're ripe. They bruise easily, so you want to handle them gently. Again, August through September in Kentucky, September is kind of the peak harvest season for us. And a single tree you'll be harvesting from over a period of 3 to 4 weeks. The fruit, when they're ripe, do have a short shelf life, so just 2 to 3 days shelf life when they're ripe. You can extend that a little bit. One thing you can do, you can pick the fruit when they're just starting to get a little bit soft. If they're completely hard, if they're hard as a rock, they will not ripen off the tree. But if they're starting to get just a little bit soft, you can pick them, and at that point, they'll store a little bit longer. You can refrigerate them for shorter term storage, or processing and freezing the pulp for longer term storage. So markets for pawpaw, if you have fruit that you're wanting to sell or you're looking for where to buy fruit, again, since they have a short shelf life, they don't ship and store very well. So local farmers markets are the main place that you will find pawpaw fruit for sale. There's a few places that do online mail order sales. Also, restaurants, wineries, breweries, distilleries are some of the main markets for pawpaw fruit. There's a lot of things you can do with pawpaw fruit, value-added products. You can eat it fresh, just eat it as is. You can also use it in baked goods recipes as a banana substitute. And there's a lot of value-add products, jam and hot sauce that we've developed some recipes for here at KSU. Also, beer, wine, and brandy have been really popular pawpaw products on the market. And pawpaw ice cream is everybody's favorite at our Pawpaw Third Thursday Thing events. So moving on into another tree fruit that is native to Kentucky. This is American persimmon. This is a slow-growing, medium to tall tree. It gets a little bit bigger than pawpaw trees, 25 to 50 feet in height. So it has smaller fruit, just 1 to 2 inches in diameter, but persimmon is well adapted to a wide variety of soils. They'll do okay in wet or dry locations, all different soil types. So persimmon is also a native plant, and this shows the native range of American persimmon. You see we're a little bit more on the northern end of the range for American persimmon. However, the quality of the more northern strains is better than the farther south strains of American persimmon. So most of the cultivars that you see on the market that were selected in the wild are from Indiana, Illinois, places like that are more on the northern end. So we do get some good quality wild persimmon fruit here in Kentucky. Persimmon does have male and female trees, separate trees. Only the female trees produce fruit, but they do need a male to pollinate them to set fruit. And in the wild, usually you find about half male, half female trees. If you're looking for pawpaw or for persimmon trees in the wild, the most distinguishing characteristic of them is the bark, this really deeply furrowed, blocky gray bark. Somebody said once that it looks like charcoal briquettes on a tree, and that's what I always see now. So you can find them pretty easily in the woods. They do have a really hard, strong wood, so the lumber is valuable with persimmon also. But the fruit are eaten both by people and many species of wildlife. So if you're interested in growing persimmons, as we said, it's adaptable to a lot of different soil types, but a moist, silty loam soil, slightly acid to neutral pH is ideal. Full sun for best fruit production. You don't need to prune persimmons a lot. They're pretty low maintenance. You can start persimmons from seed. They need to be stored in the refrigerator over the winter. That's the same with pawpaw. If you want to start pawpaw from seed, they need to be kept damp and stored in the refrigerator over the winter. Persimmons can also be grafted onto seedling rootstocks if you want a particular cultivar. Persimmons get a little bit larger than pawpaws, so 20 feet or so, 20 to 30 feet is the recommended plant spacing on those. They do need irrigation when they're young, but the mature trees are more tolerant of a dry soil, and they're pretty pest and disease-free. So seedling persimmons will bear fruit in 4 to 9 years, grafted trees a little bit sooner in 3 to 5 years. They will also drop when they're ripe, so you see some people have a setup like this of a net or a tarp underneath trees to catch the fruit as they fall. You want to leave the little green cap on persimmons if possible, because if you pick them and that tears, that makes a tear in the skin and has a shorter shelf life. So persimmon trees, you get usually 35 to 75 pounds of fruit per tree. Persimmon cultivars that are recommended for Kentucky: Early Golden, Yates, John Rick, Morris Burton, Proc, Killen, and Dollywood are all some persimmon cultivars that do well here. Again, you can harvest from wild trees. Generally, the named cultivars will have larger fruit and higher yield. The persimmons that you see in the grocery store are Asian persimmons. So we're talking about American persimmon. The large, firm fruit that you often find in the grocery are Asian persimmons, which are not cold hardy here in Kentucky. And there are several nurseries, several of the same nurseries that sell pawpaw trees also sell persimmon trees. Persimmons are also a fall ripening fruit, a little bit later than pawpaw, so September to October. The fruit need to be fully ripe or they're very astringent. If you've ever eaten an underripe persimmon, then you know this. They're extremely astringent until they're completely ripe, but when they're ripe, they're super sweet, almost like candy. You can also freeze persimmons for longer term storage, use processing a food mill similar to pawpaw. And there's a lot of value-added products you can make with persimmon as well. Persimmon ice cream, I've seen quite a bit in Indiana, is pretty popular. Baked goods, dried fruit are all things you can make with persimmon. So that wraps up our fruits for Kentucky. If you have any questions about any of these or other fruits, you can reach me at this email, sherry.crabtree@kysu.edu. I also want to let you know about a couple of things that are coming up. Our horticulture Third Thursday thing, which is also National Pawpaw Day, is the third Thursday of September, which is September 15th, 2022. So that's a ways away, but go ahead and mark that on your calendar. And also, if you'd like to keep up to date with us, we do have a Facebook page. If you have Facebook, just search for KSU Pawpaw. And we also have a web page where our current research and events will be posted. So thank you for joining us.